It's officially 2026, or as I like to call it, the year of Deltarune Chapter 5. That's right, we're less than 365 days away from the release of the next Deltarune chapter. This feels different than last time, as Toby Fox has already begun teasing content on his Twitter account. Translation notes that imply things about the shadow crystals, Susie asking about scary movies and a creepy doll, and of course, who could forget Cootie, who may or may not be caked up. I've already released my early Chapter 5 predictions based on what we know, but this isn't a video for me to give my predictions. This is a theory review, in which I'm going to cover all of your theories. So then, without any further ado, my name is Spookydood, make sure to like and subscribe, now let's discuss. Theory number 1 is our biggest in the entire video, and it's crazy. This was sent by the Mason Gamer. Mason claims to have 100% undeniable proof that Asriel is the Knight. To be honest with you, while I initially thought that this was going to be impossible to convince me on going in, this is an extremely convincing theory, so I urge you to give it a chance. First off, the Knight's bat and ball. The Knight starts out summoning a baseball bat that transforms into a sword. It also turns into a baseball. This is obviously tied to Des, right? Well, not so fast. In the Undertale 10th Anniversary livestream, Toby revealed unused Undertale items, including Asriel's shirt and Asriel's bat. In Chapter 4, we see a beaten-up wiffle bat in Des's room. However, we also see tons of Asriel's items, including a sweater and a retainer. These two were extremely close, possibly even in a relationship. Therefore, it's possible that this bat in Des's room was Asriel's, not December's. Baseball might not actually be thematically tied to Des in the way that we think. Instead, it's tied to Asriel, with Des's sport of choice being hockey. There's more evidence to prove this. Asriel's bat in Undertale would have dealt 40 damage, making it the most powerful weapon in the game other than the real knife, which is Genocide exclusive. In Deltarune, the Knight's damage value is set to 40. The Knight and Asriel's bat both deal 40 damage. Now, the theory isn't saying that the Knight is using the specific bat we see in Des's room. That's probably an old beaten-up one, but it's instead using Asriel's real bat in the current day. As for rolling into a ball, Toriel mentions that Asriel loved the green lizard from that game, obviously referring to Yoshi from Super Smash Bros. Yoshi has a move in Super Smash Bros. Where he rolls around in a small egg ball form. This does get brought up again by Tenna, so it seems like it could be an important character trait of Asriel's. Another piece of evidence is that the Knight's final move is a direct parallel to Asriel's Hyper Goner attack. It also shoots exploding stars, which are definitely stars and not snowflakes considering it's a direct allusion to Earthbound's PK Starstorm. Asriel makes stars rain down and explode into pieces. The Shadow Mantle, by the way, protects against dark/star attacks. Asriel's menacing spiky tooth laugh is very similar to the Knight laughing in Chapter 4, also sporting spiky teeth. The Knight's choice of weapon is a sword, which Asriel also uses in his fight. People mention that the Knight is left-handed, considering its sword is in the left hand most of its time. It does attack with both hands, but so does Asriel with his two swords, yet we see him primarily use his left for attacks, and reach out with the left hand in the Kara flashback. The Knight also summons a Titan using its left hand to swing daggers into the ground. Asriel and the Knight use both hands, but the left is consistently shown to be dominant. They also both shoot beams of light from their hands, use laser patterns before firing, and leave After Effect trails behind them. And lastly, when fighting the Titan, you can see one of the spawn that attacks you is literally the chomping mouth face that Omega Flowey shoots out. Asriel and Flowey's motifs are hidden everywhere. The Knight's theme begins with a motif that sounds very similar to Burn in Despair from Undertale. Shortly after, we hear a siren-like sound play 4 times before the main melody drops. Omega Flowey's boss fight also has 4 siren-like sounds before cutting to a soul attack. You might suggest it's actually the Burning Eyes theme from ERAM's battle. However, ERAM and the Shadow Mantle quest are specifically tied to the Knight and its fight, so it's actually Burning Eyes that is referencing the Knight fight, not the other way around. There's also an unused Knight sound called SND_Knight Pulse in the files. It sounds like sped up talking. When slowing and isolating it, the sound is near identical to Asriel's adult voice. Even the audio peaks look the same. Next, we have the Dark Truth from Chapter 2. This plays when Ralsei explains to Queen what happens when you cause the roaring. The Dark Truth starts with Your Best Nightmare from Omega Flowey. We also hear this song again in Chapter 4, when you struggle against the Knight. Not only that, but it's also in Digital Roots and Bit Roots, both of which are tied to either the Shadow Crystal or ERAM, which are all tied to the Knight. Flowers are known to have roots, so this most likely isn't the last time we'll hear Your Best Nightmare, considering roots is literally a prophecy panel. Glacier also seems to have the yellow soul motif from Omega Flowey's fight. There's also the knight's mannerisms. It's cocky, confident, pointing its finger, as many others say it's aura farming, and it does seem very similar to Asriel from Undertale. He's smug, he thinks highly of himself, and he's so overly edgy that he even names himself the god of hyperdeath. We also first see the knight with its back dramatically turned away before turning to us, just like when we see Asriel for the first time in Undertale. We can see the knight become more desperate and aggressive in its attacks as it starts losing. This is also similar to Asriel in Undertale. Also, the knight is crying when we first see it, with tears dripping down its eyes. If this were Des, why would she be crying? If she herself isn't lost, then there's no one she needs to feel sad over. Instead, it's Asriel, crying over the constant search for his love, lost in an endless night. There is a rare piece of dialogue from Ribic in Chapter 3 saying, "A crying and crying and crying boy, a lost and lost and lost girl." Asriel is clearly the crying boy, and it seems to directly parallel the way that the knight was crying. In Chapter 4, there's also the book that says, "And so wept the fallen star, making rivers with its tears. Then, slowly from the bitter water, something grew. It looked like glass." This is referencing the knight, as it's not only seen crying, but its shadow crystals turn to glass in the light world. And the mention of a fallen star is, according to the Bible, an angel, of which we have a prophecy depicting such in both Undertale and Deltarune. Asriel also rains down falling stars in his fight, and a star disappears from his side of their bedroom between chapters 2 and 4. This isn't the star that Susie kicks off the wall, it just disappears on its own, as if it's a fallen star that perhaps fell behind the dresser. As far as its antlers go, while this does seem Des-related, and it's going to be pretty hard to explain the knight having antlers without it being Des, it is worth mentioning that the Holiday family's antlers are mostly straight, and Chapter 4 does mention that the knight wears a helmet, so this could be just that, a helmet, an homage to Des, and not actually real antlers. As far as the knight and Kris's strange connections, well, they're literally siblings. The relationship between Kris and Des is rarely if ever touched on, as Des was seemingly closer with Asriel, and Kris with Noelle. But Kris and Asriel were best friends. You know, there's that thing that everybody talks about where Kris poses in the same way with her arms folded like the knight does, and a lot of people are saying that the knight is, somehow telepathically connected to Kris, or Kris learned it from Des, but I think it makes the most sense for Kris to have learned that from Asriel. Undyne is very physically capable, and the only time we see her get restrained is by Flowey in Undertale and, of course, the knight. Those two, obviously being the only ones to restrain her, you never know, it could be the same person. After all, we do know from Deltarune that Asriel is apparently very physically capable. The Gonermaker dialogue is very similar to the Asriel Kara flashback dialogue in Undertale, even ending with "Your name is," similar to "My name is." What if this is Asriel, and Asriel is saying these things to us because he's interrupted the Gonermaker process and he's working with Kris? Kris is the one who refused to look in Asriel's room in Chapter 2. If you choose not to open the door, the dialogue says, you have the feeling you wouldn't learn anything. What is it that Kris knows about Asriel that they don't want us to know? Well, if you analyze the knight in Chapter 3, the dialogue says, Kris analyzed the enemy. But Kris couldn't learn anything. You have the feeling you wouldn't learn anything. Kris couldn't learn anything. I don't know, that sounds really close to me. There's also the closets, the ones that say a large person could fit inside. It seems clear that the knight is hiding inside, which makes sense if it's Asriel. As far as the other candidates go, Carol acts nothing like the knight, seems to be at her house during the events of Chapter 4, so she probably can't be in the church at the same time, is not a large person, and just seems like she's more of the red herring than she is the knight. Des is the obvious candidate, however she has dialogue calling out from the code, which updates each chapter. She's lost, scared, and alone. This doesn't sound like the knight. If Des was the knight, why would she be able to exist in the light world? Unless her body is totally possessed with her mind being stuck in the code, it doesn't make sense. And even if that was the case and her mind was stuck in the code, but her body was in the light world and, it's there, it doesn't make sense for tracks titled Lost Girl and Find Her. Why would there be such an emphasis on locating her if we know where she is? Yes, in Chapter 4, a hand will push back against you while a guitar sound plays. But that's gotta be Des, right? But does it have to be the knight? Des might be stuck in between, somewhere else, somewhere in the code where she could push back against us, but it is not the knight. There's also the fact that Asriel's favorite super smashing fighter character in Tenna's game is the Sword Magician. Tenna says, "That's right, Kris, he got embarrassed about liking the green dinosaur and switched to being a big fan of the fiery magician girl." The theory states that the green lizard is parallel to Bratty, as in Bratty's story about playing Truth or Dare with Asriel. She says that he gave her his first kiss. Bratty is the green lizard from the multiple-choice Super Smashing Fighters question, and Des is the fire magician. Des does have ties to fire, after all. Noelle is an ice magician, and she and Noelle could be like yin and yang. The lyrics for Raise Up Your Bat mention a burning fight. December ends with the word ember, and more. But the night has no fire attacks, so it maybe isn't Des. The story of Deltarune is about Des's disappearance and how it affected everyone's lives. Asriel was never closest to her, and possibly even in love with her. We hear how everyone else was affected, but never Asriel. Why? Despite the fact that there's a chance, besides Noelle, Asriel is the most deeply affected, we just never see him or hear about how it affected him. Not only did he watch his family go through torture, be ripped apart by Asgore's framing, but he lost one of his two closest friends, someone who many believe he was in love with. So why haven't we seen him yet? Do we really think, with everyone working to bring her back, that Asriel would just let it slide? Would just move away and move on? Now, before you jump to the excuse that Asriel's in college, therefore he can't be the knight, there is technically a way to explain this. Many know the flaws with any Asriel theory regarding the piles of Asriel's dust theory. How could he not be at college this whole time? Whenever you talk about any theory that involves Asriel secretly being here, Asriel being dead, Asriel being somewhere else, the big question is, how could he not be at college this whole time? That doesn't make sense for Toriel to have not heard from him, for nobody to have checked on him, etc. Well, this theory only needs him to be away from college this week, when the Roaring Knight showed up and started making dark fountains. The only way the Dreamers communicate with Asriel is seemingly through video calls. And what happened this week? Well, the internet just so happened to go down. Therefore, Asriel could realistically be in Hometown, acting as the Knight. We know that the Dark Worlds are created based on the will and mind of the Creator, and the things that show up inside of them reflect them in ways. All of the Dark Worlds are based on things from Kris and Asriel's memories. King, Queen, Tenna, even Sham were characters that Kris and Asriel created long before the Dark Worlds were opened. Remember, Sham was on Asriel's computer. In order for these characters to be created just as they were in their memories, someone who knew them had to be the one who opened the Dark Fountain, and that person seems to be Asriel. In terms of the religious symbolism, we know that the Knight is tied to religion through Spamton's comments on communion. Asriel is very much religious. The line about "they'll hear the ring of heaven's call" could be implying that Des is trapped in the code, or the heavens, and Asriel wants to free her. The ring of heaven's call could be Des calling out from the code. After all, when Spamton is interrupted by the voice asking for help, he says he thinks they were talking to you. Perhaps Asriel, Kris, or Carol heard the ring of heaven's call. They heard December, and are looking to bring her back. There's one more piece of evidence, and it's not just an extra addendum, it's this theory's smoking gun. In the late 1770s, a man named Asriel Gaster was born. His great-grandson, Theodore Herzl Gaster, was a renowned biblical scholar specializing in comparative religion, mythology, and the history of religion. His most important book is titled Thespis, Ritual, Myth, and Drama in the Ancient Near East from the year 1950. The book is incredibly relevant to Undertale and Deltarune, and it seems to be one of Toby Fox's biggest inspirations. It's a long book, but some highlights include: fettered monsters escape at the end of the world. Giant or monster is fettered in depths of the earth. His movements cause earthquakes. When he succeeds in freeing himself from the fetters and escapes, the world will end. This seems very much like the Titans. There's a line about drinking in another world and drinking from a certain river between two darknesses. There's a line about objects attacked under the illusion that they are men. And finally, there is a line in this book that states, "Faithful brother transforms self to deer to seek sister." Asriel is the faithful brother, who transforms himself to a deer to seek December. Ultimately, Asriel, lost in grief, will do anything to bring Des back. He discovers the ability to create dark worlds after investigating her disappearance, and strikes a plan with Kris and Carol using the prophecy as his guide. Kris needs the soul, so Asriel intercepts it. Kris reluctantly agrees, and they work together to enact their plan. It's highly likely that we'll eventually see the Knight unmasked as Asriel, see him reunited with Des, and the true villain will be someone like Friend, someone who took Des in the first place. Wow. Okay, look. When I clicked on this theory, I immediately saw it was 31 pages, and I said, oh, brother. Then I read one of the first lines saying that it was about how Asriel is the knight, and I said, oh, brother, even louder. I want to apologize for saying, oh, brother. I cannot believe I'm saying this, but this theory is really good, and honestly has made me consider the fact that Asriel might just be the knight. I mean, at the very least, in my book, he's up in S tier alongside Des. Okay, I'm sure some of you have some things to say about this, and I'll address some potential criticisms, but let me just get started here. I think that a lot of the evidence is definitely small stuff, like, oh, Asriel uses the left hand, and the knight uses the left hand primarily, but sometimes they switch. Maybe you don't believe that specific piece of evidence, but looking at it all, I can see where you're coming from, and I think that a lot of things line up really well. We know that Sham was on Asriel's computer. In Chapter 4, Susie specifically asks, oh, it's Sham from the computer, and oh, you drew them? But it wasn't Kris, it was Asriel who drew those pictures. So Sham was on Asriel's computer. And that told me when I saw it, okay, Kris obviously had to be the one to make the Card Kingdom. Otherwise, how would Sham have been created exactly as they were in Asriel's drawing? We know that Queen, King, the Swatches, and Spamton all existed too, as Ram comments on them and their specific physical characteristics, from back when Kris was playing with them when they were a kid, meaning whoever opened the fountains had to have known what they looked like in Kris and Asriel's imaginary world. Again, Kris, right? Except it can't be, because Kris's Dark Fountain, the Chapter 3 fountain, was admittedly different than all the others. So then it's December, right? But how could it have been Des when she never knew these characters that only Kris and Asriel really knew? Not only that, but if the knight was Des, that doesn't fully make sense. If Des is the knight, like fully healthy and fully the knight, what the heck have we been doing looking for her? And if she's not fully there, like a half-conscious, possessed state or something like a tamed beast, that doesn't fully make sense either, because who is she? What is the deal with Des being lost in the code at the same time? How come the knight seems very precise and calculated, seems to hide in the closet to avoid being seen, etc.? If you ask me, Asriel makes perfect sense here. A large person hiding inside the closet seems to imply Asgore, which is obviously false, but who would biologically be similar to Asgore's size? Asriel. So him being the one hiding could work. The internet being down mysteriously could also be explained by Asriel being the knight and coming back into town, and Carol shutting off the internet in order to facilitate the plan. Mentioning Asriel's bat in the anniversary is also really interesting. To be fair, there is very little evidence to deconfirm this. There's very little that makes this a hard no. If anything, I actually think this could make real sense. As far as the narrative goes, there is lots of potential here. But this is where we have to address some of the potential critiques with this theory, critiques that I know a lot of you guys will have. To start with, this would reduce December to a damsel in distress, a character with zero agency, and replace her with a guy who has already had the spotlight as the final antagonist of Undertale. I get that. That's not just an issue I've seen people have with this theory. That's a lot of the December is the knight but possessed theories hinge on that same idea. The thing is, to some extent, I kind of think December's agency is going to end up being stripped away, regardless of whether this theory is true or not. I understand that some people are going to take this the wrong way, but let me just explain. If the knight is flat out Des Holiday, fully aware and conscious, that just doesn't make sense and completely throws so much of what we know about the plot out the window. It wouldn't be a story about getting December back anymore because the knight, Carol, and Kris are all working together in a weird underground team. Why would December be fully aware of her actions and still doing this? Why would anyone even want to do this if December is alive? Why wouldn't December be at home with Noelle? Couldn't she keep up appearances while also being the knight? So no matter what you think about Des Knight, it can't straight up just be Des, fully alive and fully aware as the knight. That just doesn't make sense. So now we come to Des is a sort of feral beast body that's being controlled by dark crystal magic, or the knight flat out isn't Des, it's someone else. Really what we're talking about here is the knight is a half character or the knight is a full character of their own. I understand that some people will get annoyed with this, but if I have to choose between like half Des sort of just stand-in big demonic force that's meant to represent something, or it's Asriel, I kind of think it would be more interesting for the story to go in the direction of Asriel being the knight, as opposed to the knight just being December's body kept alive through darkness. We already know that December is lost somewhere and needs to be found to be brought back. The knight being her body doesn't necessarily need to happen to help us get that. That being said, it does seem like the obvious answer. Yet again, as I said with Kris Knight, I find myself feeling like perhaps Toby Fox isn't keeping the knight a mystery anymore. Maybe the Roaring Knight's appearance was meant to tell us, yeah, it's not Kris, you know exactly who this is, that being December Holiday. The eventual reveal that the Knight is a, December remnant body FNAF puppet type possession husk could still be a natural way to lead the player to understand that the Knight is, the Knight is the body and December's mind is still lost. However, that being said, the reveal that Asriel is the Knight could be extremely impactful. Just imagine if you go home after Chapter 5, and we go back home and find a letter addressed to Toriel from Asriel's college. There's no music, Susie's not in there, it's just Kris. You pick up the letter, and it's either from the college or Asriel's roommate or something, writing to inform her that Asriel hasn't been seen for a few days. That would be like jaw-dropping, because suddenly you'd ask, wait a minute, is he here already? And it would hit you, oh my god, I know what he's doing here. That would be like crazy, I don't know. I know that theories based on hype moments and aura is never good, but I think that Asriel as the Knight does technically work and does give another logical explanation for his computer screen to show the god of hyperdeath design, because an ultra-powerful aura-farming Knight is something he'd totally make himself given the chance. Onto some of the other evidence, I think Asriel Gaster's great-grandson's book saying the brother transforms into a deer to search for the sister. I'm sorry, but with this one, I'm going to have to say it's really thin. Don't get me wrong, I love this. If I made this theory, this is the exact type of thing I'd come up with. The fact is that the connections with Deltarune, they're just a little too thin right now for me to firmly say that this book served as a sort of inspiration. There's definitely stuff there, and I think there's like... Okay, there was a weird thing with Homestuck where, like, Andrew Hussey would reference something, and then there'd be, like, every facet of that thing is somehow referenced. I can't come up with an example in my head right now, but if you read Homestuck, you'd know where, like, there was something, I forget what it was. Oh, it was with, like, it was something about, like Dave's sword or something specific where it was like, oh, this is a hyper niche reference to this thing that was referenced once, and it would end up being super important. And I do kind of think that with Toby Fox, it's obviously not at that level, but I'm sure he's researched names like Gaster and Asriel, and I'm sure he's possibly come across Asriel Gaster at some point, and there's a chance he read the book, but I just don't know yet if that's so fully, like, real. You know what I'm saying? I do think it's interesting. The faithful brother turns himself into a deer to search for his sister. That's interesting, but I'm not so sure just yet. I don't think that this is entirely out of character for Asriel. You might think that this is a little out of the blue, like, oh my gosh, he's turned into an evil knight, but a grieving boy turned to anger that lashes out on the world around him by becoming a godlike entity is sort of exactly what happened in Undertale. Not only that, but this seems like Asriel is determined to achieve his goal, not actually hurt anyone. Either way, I do think it has its ups and downs. It is slightly conspiracy-pilled in the sense that Death Knight is the simplest, most easily agreed upon answer, but does it also fill a ton of the holes with Death Knight and also stand as a very satisfying answer as to who the Knight is? Yes, absolutely. This theory, in my book, gets a flat-out 10 out of 10. Even if I don't fully believe it just yet, I think it is a fantastic theory, and it is really well put together, and it is extremely convincing. I went from thinking that Asriel could never be the Knight, that's just silly, to, wow, I think he's a really great candidate if it's not Des. I really want to know you guys' thoughts on this one. This is just, I mean, it really did blow my mind. The fact that Asriel Knight is now a big possibility for me is crazy, and I urge you to really think about the evidence here before writing it off. I mean, you have a feeling you wouldn't learn anything, and then the Knight's check dialogue being, you couldn't learn anything. Come on, that's totally crazy. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments, but this one, again, gets a 10 out of 10 from me. The second theory is from The Jester, and it's called Power Theory. Basically, this theory states that the main reason we're here in Deltarune, and what people who know us, aka Gaster, Carol, the Knight probably, and Kris, want from us, is to gain power, the thing we gain at every save point, similarly to how we gain determination in Undertale. This is probably why the song for sealing fountains is called Your Power. By going through Dark Worlds, getting to save points, and by sealing fountains, we gain power. Some evidence includes the fact that we don't use light at all in the early chapters besides sealing the fountains, but now we can use the fountain sealing light and light up rooms against Jackenstein and the Titans. So why is this? Well, the question is, who really wants this power? Gaster brought us here for his own curiosity and a seeming connection he wants with us, but it's possible he has another reason. He also wants to use our power to prevent something, to create the new future that he mentions. Then we go to Team Knight, where the reason they put us in Kris is so that Kris can use our power too. The reason to involve Des in some way as the Knight is so that using our power we can purify the Knight with us needing power to do so. This is also why the Knight is so taunting and antagonistic. They are playing the villain, making fountains that require us to seal them, attacking Tenna and Jackenstein to make us mad, but it's also the reason that they aren't doing much in Chapter 4. The Knight is waiting for us. They're playing the villain to get us to fight harder and become more powerful, and eventually we'll want to try and purify them. Wow, first off, this theory definitely has a lot of really good ideas. One thing I like is that it ties all the different factions and forces down to wanting one specific thing: our power. If this theory is actually right, it basically explains everything about Gaster wanting to create a new future and Carol's seemingly calculated plan. If Carol interrupted Gaster during the Goner Maker sequence, she did it for a reason, and needing a powered-up soul isn't the worst explanation. It could also explain why Kris's soul wasn't usable. Our soul being a sort of ultimate important item for everyone to try and obtain could come across a little bit too, I don't know, comic booky if you look at it a certain way, but I don't think it needs to be. It is true that our soul has powers that nobody else does, including other Lightners, and if it has the power to purify the Knight, well, like I said, it could explain why Carol wants us. What I'm less convinced by is the Knight playing villain to help us angle. Yes, the Knight's behavior in Chapter 4 could be considered strange. They wait for us, they don't cause the roaring even though they clearly could, but there are other explanations for that, specifically the fact that the Knight isn't out to cause the roaring. They've clearly got some deal going on with Kris and have more of a specific plan that we just don't understand yet. The Knight attacking Tenna and kidnapping Undyne doesn't feel like someone staging obstacles to make us stronger. It feels like someone with their own agenda that doesn't necessarily revolve around us at all. Also, the save point connection is interesting, but I'm not too sure about how I feel. The thing is, I don't know if the save points themselves are actually the things filling us with power, as much as they are just telling us that we are filled with power. The other thing is, the power that the save points are describing very well may be determination itself. Determination is rarely mentioned in-game, but it is alluded to several times. I think it's possible, especially with the recent teases that Toby Fox put on Twitter, that these save points talking about our power may actually be referring to determination. The reason Lightworld save points are different might have more to do with the nature of reality itself, in Deltarune, rather than a power accumulation mechanic. To believe this theory, I think we'd need more evidence that save points are specifically designed as power collection tools as opposed to just save points. Overall, I definitely like the idea. Like I said, I really do like the idea that power is tying everything in the game together, and I do have a feeling that we, the Soul, have some kind of unique power that nobody else has, especially considering the song Your Power, like you mentioned, and the fact that Kris's soul is the only one that can seal the fountains, but I'm not sure just yet how it will all tie together. That being said, it is true that our soul is wanted by multiple parties, and that we probably have unique powers that others don't. Therefore, I'm giving this theory a 7 out of 10. Theory 3 is sent by Yellow Fellow, and it's regarding what the colors pink and yellow might represent. Yellow represents the normal state of things, the way things are meant to be without external influence, while pink represents the alternate possibility, a world where things are not exactly the way they are meant to be. One example of this is in Undertale, where the monsters can have pink and yellow names when you spare them. The yellow names are the standard, but the player can influence them to become pink instead. In Deltarune, we have the obvious Susie and Noelle being represented as pink and yellow, respectively. At the start of the game, Noelle is the one who wants to go with Kris to get the chalk, which makes her the real second hero of the prophecy. However, she was interrupted by Susie, who subsequently takes over that role. The immediate objection of this interpretation is that the weird route is the one that is focused on Noelle, so how would that match up with the yellow being a representation of the way things are meant to be without external influence? Well, the weird route could be a misguided attempt to steer the world back into the way it was meant to be, to make Noelle the second hero and have her fulfill the prophecy. Therefore, the yellow, the way that things are meant to be without being affected by an external force. For example, maybe the original meaning of love finds its way to the girl is supposed to be literal, using our normal everyday meaning of love, Noelle falling in love, for example, but in the weird route, in an attempt to steer Noelle in this direction, we fulfill this part of the prophecy using the level of violence interpretation instead of love. The implication of this might be that at the end of the weird route, we find that this attempt to steer the world back in the direction was in vain, and this has instead led to some sort of disastrous ending, much worse than any other possibility. Another thing we can analyze in this context is other characters with pink and yellow colors on their sprites. Ralsei, for example, has a pink scarf, and he wants to change the prophecy to avoid its ending. Gerson has pink hair and a yellow eye, has knowledge of the way things are meant to be, but believes it's better to try and change the story in your own way. Friend, with both pink and yellow eyes, has a higher understanding of what's going on in Deltarune and can see both possibilities. Spamton, who went insane after receiving a phone call which presumably revealed something about the world to him, might know about these two possible worlds but cannot truly understand or grasp them, as exemplified by his pink and yellow tinted glasses. Okay, I think this theory is really cool, as it's trying both to decode the pink and yellow motif, while also using that motif to say something about the future of the narrative, and I think it does both of those things pretty effectively. It is true that the pink and yellow are used quite frequently throughout Deltarune, specifically in relation to one another. So much so that pretty much everyone in the fanbase considers it to be an actual meant-to-be accepted motif at this point. It is also true that one of the biggest fan theories in relation to Chapter 4's prophecy panels is that Noelle and Susie are possibly interchangeable as the second hero. It's possible that one was intended as the second hero, only for another to take their place on either the main route or the weird route, depending on what you believe. Therefore, based on this theory's evidence, it actually seems kind of likely. How have pink and yellow been used in-game? Well, the Undertale names are very accurate. I mean, it is meant to be yellow, however, after you tamper with it, the fallback is pink, which does line up with your points. Through our interference, we changed what was expected to something different. I also like your analysis of the pink and yellow on characters to determine their viewpoints. Ralsei mostly features pink, and he wants to alter the prophecy. Gerson has a yellow eye but pink hair, and he wants us to change the prophecy while also having knowledge of the future. Pink and yellow meaning freedom and control, or the prophecy, could actually make a ton of sense. The balance between these two ideas seems to be at the core of Deltarune's narrative, and the frequent occurrence of pink and yellow together could mean it's standing in for those ideas. Every character who's had pink or yellow as a focus just so happens to tie into either the concept of freedom versus control, or image friend in some way. Spamton fully plays into the idea of freedom or control, the mics all tie into image friend, etc. The problem is I don't necessarily think we have enough evidence to confirm this is true just yet. If pink and yellow were used more frequently in contrast to one another in such a way that we were able to tell, what they stand for, maybe a second instance of pink being changed versus yellow being original, then okay, I think we'd have some solid ground to walk on. The problem is we just don't have that yet. The evidence, in my opinion, is a little too sparse. There is one thing I'd like to bring up, though. While your instinct is solid, it is also potentially dangerous to fully commit to, as color theories are where people accidentally turn art direction into, cosmic law in this fanbase. To be entirely fair, Asgore features pink and gold, but isn't necessarily tied to freedom versus control, yet. Similarly, the field of pink and gold, while it might tie into this idea, is seemingly just the location for the next chapter. By all means, the pink and gold color scheme could just tie into image friend. Or alternatively, it could mean something completely different, or tie into Gaster's design, which is why it was so heavily featured. I'm not saying that any of these are likely or even believable. I'm just pointing out that I think it's too early to fully commit just yet, especially with the lack of complete evidence. That being said, if your theory is correct, it could imply something for Chapter 5. The field of pink and gold could be the place where we lock in our future. Are we going pink, meaning changing the future in our own way, or are we going gold, returning things to the way they're meant to be? Maybe this is where we choose whether to fully lock into the weird route or not. As in, despite me thinking that's what happened in Chapter 4, maybe we're given one last chance to back out. Alternatively, maybe the fifth and final Shadow Crystal, or the egg, is what allows us to have the pink ending, an ending that involves writing our own future. Either way, I definitely think it's a solid theory, and the only real answer to the pink and yellow that I've heard so far that makes a lot of sense, so I'm going 7 out of 10 with this one. Theory 4 is from T-Steel, and it's about the Eggman in the Light World. The greenhouse and hometown is very interesting. In Chapter 1, checking it yields the dialogue, there's some kind of scratching noise coming from inside. In Chapter 2, it says there's some kind of scratching and hissing from inside. But in Chapter 4, the dialogue says, peering into the dark, it appears that the yellow circles in the window were just fresh donuts, and the hissing was the fryer. Remember the Eggman's dialogue from Chapter 3? He says, on Thursday I go to sell the donuts. On Friday I toss the leftovers in the dumpster. On Saturday I let it cool on the windowsill. We see in Chapter 4 donuts in the window after we hear this dialogue from the Eggman. In Dessa's code dialogue, she says she hears a scratching noise. Perhaps this is all connected. Perhaps the greenhouse in the Light World is the Eggman's house. Not only that, but the egg room and the house are both green. If you want to go even further, perhaps Des is trapped in this house, based on the hissing noises. Okay, this is interesting and I'm going to split it in two. First, the idea that Des is trapped in the house. No, I don't necessarily believe that. It just to me sounds a little too crazy to be true. I feel like Des would be able to realistically escape this random house if she was in there. Also, the police probably would have searched all the houses during the initial investigation. But, on the topic of this being the Eggman's house, I guess that's actually possible. One thing I do want to say is that you said the egg room is green and the house is green. I think only the second egg room is green, right? That's the That's the one with... Oh, but the third egg room, the man country, that's green, and there's also the green connection. So I guess there's some evidence there. We do know that the Eggman is in Hometown, as we see him in the diner and in his car. It's theoretically possible that he's also got a house. This evidence, it is a little thin, right? It's sort of a crack theory, but there's nothing stopping this from being his house. Overall, I would give this one a 6 out of 10. Like I said, there's not enough for me to firmly believe this, but there's nothing wrong with this theory. The donuts being the link between the house and the Eggman makes sense. So yeah, I guess this could be his house. Also, like I said, it's green, which, if you're in the Deltarune fanbase, you know how people like to talk about green stuff recently. Theory number 5 was sent by U Blentron. Friend is the primordial form of Darkners. Image Friend appears in several Dark Worlds, and their shape changes a lot. In Chapter 3, we see that one specific form of Image Friend. It seems as if this is possibly meant to be the Darkener version of the chair from the prior screen. If this is Susie's chair, she's obviously not dragging it around into every Dark World, so Image Friend's Light World object can't be this chair. There's a few other objects that seem to possibly be Image Friend's Light World object. The pink and yellow off-brand controller, and then there's the whole Cat Pedders game. So the question is raised, where does Image Friend actually originate from? What is Image Friend's Light World object? Is it any of these things? Is it none of these things? Well, this theory states that Friend isn't a traditional Darkener. It's not a manifestation of any given object, nor is Friend a singular character at all. Rather, Friend is the darkness itself created from a fountain before it bonds itself to an object, program, or idea, creating a Darkener. This would explain why there's a few characters out there who have passing resemblances to Image Friend while being different characters, such as Spamton's pink and yellow glasses, Sean being a suspicious cat with asymmetrical eyes, and Tenna having a friend-esque smile when Kris first opened the Dark World. And also, of course, all the mics. Their traits are the remnants of the birth of Darkeners. Beyond this, there's the whole Element 6 being puppet/cat, a Darkener being created through Friend sort of puppeting these bodies would explain why puppets and cats are elemental pairs. There's also 6's own association with darkness thanks to Gaster, and the idea of a Schrodinger's cat. Multiple results being, oh, it's Schrodinger, Spookydood, it's not Schrodinger. Well, you know what, you could go... Guess what, you can't see me behind the screen, but I'm giving you Schrodinger's middle finger right now. No, I'm kidding. I'm not. I wouldn't do that to you guys. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt the theory. There's also 6's own... There's also 6's own association with darkness thanks to Gaster, and the idea of a Schrodinger's cat, multiple results being simultaneously possible until clear signs indicate one result. Similarly, Friend can simultaneously be any Darkener until they bond with something. Lastly, this acts as an explanation for the label Image Friend, as according to Ralsei, Darkeners are meant to serve Lighteners and bring them joy. So, in a way, every Darkener is a friend. I actually really like this idea. I think the two strongest points are probably the thing about Schrodinger's cat and the Image Friend name. I don't mean to, sorry for the interruption there. I got a little frustrated when I realized that people would call me out on calling him Schrodinger. But the idea of Friend being like a Schrodinger's cat situation where the reason it's a cat is because it's like it is and isn't a Darkener. It could be anything. It's not really decided on yet. Like, that's a great idea. Like, that's some clever stuff. All right, hats off to you. The idea that Image Friend is sort of a primordial Darkener, the thing that Darkeners are birthed from, that makes sense. Again, I really like how neat the explanation is. The only problem is, I kind of think this theory would be one that much more believable before the release of Chapters 3 and 4. Now we're at a point where it kind of seems like Image Friend does actually have a singular existence. We've got ties to the circles, the Tale of Hell, and more, all of which point to Friend having a singular existence and not being so much of a concept. But I still really like your idea. I think that it makes a ton of sense, and if Friend isn't some evil cat from hell, I think you're probably right on the money. For that reason, I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Theory 6 is from Baked Royal. Asriel is a key witness of Des' disappearance. This is why Asriel is currently absent from the story. He will come back for the festival in Chapter 5, and once we ask him about the shelter, he will give us the biggest lore drop about Des yet, and kick us off to going inside the shelter. All of this was hinted at in Chapter 2, when we try to enter Asriel's room in Queen's Mansion and Kris refuses. This is because his room also contained a lot of search history related to Des, similar to Noelle. The festival, Asriel coming home, and Asriel and Des' relationship has been hyped up increasingly, peaking with Asriel's items being found in Des' room, so it's probably going to be revealed that Asriel knows something that is the reason he was kept away from us. Yeah, I think this is very accurate. To be honest with you, if Asriel isn't the knight, this has been the theory that I've always believed, that the reason Asriel is being kept away from us is because of how important his knowledge is, and how crazy the potential lore drop will be once he reappears. I'm giving this one a 10 out of 10. Based solely on the fact that narratively this has been pretty much built up to since day one, I think it's almost certain. Keeping Asriel away from us only makes sense if there's a reason to, and I think when he returns we might find out that reason, either through his relationship with Kris possibly being strained, or he flat out tells us with his words what happened and why he's upset. I think this is very likely, and unfortunately I don't really have anything else to say about it. It just seems totally correct in the direction the game is going in. Theory 7 is from Toonbin. What if one of the main goals in the Weird Route is to actually gain full control of Kris? How would we do this? Well, by fully breaking Kris mentally, just as we did to Noelle. Since we couldn't gain full control of Kris at first, we level up Noelle and gain control of her in preparation for defeating Ralsei. If Ralsei is aware of the soul and the Weird Route and how it is affecting Kris, which he most likely is based on how he reacts in chapters 3 and 4 during the Weird Routes, Ralsei would confront us and Noelle directly. Kris would likely resist us from fighting him, but Noelle would not. With her, we're able to defeat Ralsei, who will drop an item that will mentally break Kris, the Red Horn Headband. Kris had begun to accept that Ralsei is a unique person and not just an image of their ideal self. We then strip it all away. The Red Horn Headband serves as a permanent reminder of all of Kris's insecurities and hatred within their situation. Self-hatred, that is. That they will never live up to their brother, that they are forever a misfit in their world, that the good days of the past are never coming back, and that they can never wash it all away. On top of all of this, it reminds Kris that they can truly never become what they desire the most, and that their choices really truly do not matter in this world. After seeing Ralsei fade and drop the headband, Kris becomes immobile from emotional distress, and we are able to equip the headband onto Kris using Noelle, paralleling how Kris equipped the Thorn Ring onto Noelle. Once the headband is equipped onto Kris, we can fully control Kris and continue the Weird Route. I would imagine this happening near the end of Chapter 6, with Susie being absent at this moment, likely dealing with something else or not even in the Dark World. The Red Horn's headband would be the best defensive item in the game, which would be pretty funny that the best defensive item ironically comes from Ralsei. This could also parallel the Heart Locket from Undertale. It would be automatically equipped to the first slot and would not be able to be removed. The theory also states that the Thorn Ring would gain this property likely in Chapter 5. The headband would give Trance Up and also appear with no changes in the Light World like the Black Shard. This is a really cool idea, and I think that while definitely a bit of a reach, I don't think it's a total reach. I have been wondering for a while how Kris is going to play into the future of the Weird Route. I felt for a long time that we were going to flat out ditch Kris and go into Noelle instead, with Kris probably acting as an antagonistic figure who fights against us to stop us. However, I have seen several theories that imply Kris is necessary for the end of the game. After all, doesn't the prophecy require 3 heroes to approach World's Edge? So perhaps we will need Kris. As for this specific sequence of events, I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. On the one hand, I think it's an excellent payoff for the Red Headband. A great idea, a cool fight concept, and a totally reasonable way to break Kris into soul submission. On the other hand, it does sort of throw my previous point into question. Aren't there supposed to be 3 heroes at World's Edge? In my opinion, it would make more sense for Susie to be the Weird Route good guy fight. That being said, it is totally logical, and I think that, as far as the story goes, it's plausible. Therefore, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Theory 8 was sent by John. Basically, the 3 boss-related prophecy panels are being misinterpreted. These panels are, of course, the Queen's Chariot cannot be stopped, the Lord of Screens cleaved red by blade, and the Flower Man trapped in Asylum. The theory begins by talking about the Queen's Chariot prophecy panel. Queen has a car which you drive with her. However, it is stopped. See, not only is the car going in a different direction than the one on the prophecy panel, but it is stopped by the traffic jam. This just feels too simplistic to be what the prophecy panel is referencing, because the Queen's Chariot is stopped. In Gerson's battle dialogue, he says that Chapter 2 is the City of the Shining, in which the heroes do battle in chariots to save the Queen. In Chapter 2, you don't fight to save Queen, you fight against Queen. The closest parallel to this is in the bumper car roller coaster fight against Birdly, where you're battling against Birdly to save Noelle. Perhaps this panel is actually treating Noelle as the Queen. Jevel says after you beat him, soon the Queen returns and Hell's roar bubbles from the depths. Maybe he was talking about Noelle, who we might use later on to cause the roaring. Noelle's chariot, then, is the bumper car roller coaster cart that she's in. This part of the prophecy, where her chariot cannot be stopped, hasn't happened yet, because it's Noelle who's the queen, and the chariot, well, we haven't seen the moment in which Noelle is in a chariot that can't be stopped. Moving on to the Lord of the Screens, cleaved red by blade, this isn't talking about Tenna. The prophecy panel shows the screen cut in half, while Tenna's arms are ripped off by 2 sword slashes. Instead, we, the player, are the Lord of Screens, and we'll be cleaved by Blade. In the End of the Genocide route, Kara slashes at your screen, in a situation that'll be very similar to what happens later in Deltarune, when we're cleaved red by Blade. We are the Lord of the Screens. Finally, the Flower Man trapped in Asylum probably refers to Asgore. However, the theory does throw the idea out there that maybe it's Asriel. Maybe Asriel is the Flower Man, which makes sense considering he's now an adult, and also was Flowey in Undertale. In conclusion, Noelle is the queen and her chariot will be unstoppable later in the game. We are the Lord of Screens, and our computer screen will be split in 2, and Asgore is the Flower King who will be trapped in Asylum. All of these things that are foreshadowed by the prophecy panel haven't happened yet. Okay, I like this idea because it's cool to think about these alternate takes on the prophecy panels. I definitely like the idea that Asriel is the Flower Man. That's a clever idea. And I will also say, it has always kind of bothered me that the Queen's chariot is stopped in Chapter 2. The only other explanation I've thought of is that the Queen's robot is the chariot, but it shows us a picture of a vehicle moving left. Technically, your theory does answer it. That being said, though, I'm not sure I can really subscribe to this theory. It just seems too out of the way of an answer, like we're jumping hoops to not believe what's right in front of us. If it was only the Queen's chariot and the Flower Man, maybe I'd be more inclined to believe it. However, the Lord of the Screens cleaved red by Blade, I mean, it definitely seems to be Tenna. I like the intuition, and frankly, I do think it's plausible that perhaps these prophecy panels are being misinterpreted, as is the prophecy, or some other kind of twist, like the prophecy itself is being reinterpreted by the game's story. The Knight and Kris and Carol are all like, follow the prophecy. They're following the prophecy and trying to recreate it, rather than the prophecy being like an actual force that determines what will happen. Something like that. Either way, I do like the idea, but I do have to give it a 6 out of 10. I just think it's too much of an Occam's razor situation where the obvious answer is probably the obvious answer. I would like to just add, though, I think that the prophecy panel confusion could be explained in another way. Like, Gerson's explanation of what happens in Lord of the Hammer isn't meant to be a one-to-one parallel to what happens in the game, because he explains that stories are retold, and he based his thing off the prophecy, and, you know, we might be having our thing based off of his thing. Like, it just goes and it spins and it's different. It's implied that Gerson's stories were based on the prophecy itself. So the Queen's chariot cannot be stopped became the heroes do battle in chariots to save the Queen. And so I think that with Deltarune, like, there's a chance that our adventure isn't meant to be a one-to-one parallel, a one-to-one direct retelling of the prophecy. It's not like the prophecy tells exactly what'll happen. It's the prophecy is being retold by our adventure. Something like that, right? There are ways to explain it, but I definitely get where you're coming from. Theory 9 is from Hopscotch81, and it's called Lightyear Theory. That's right, it begins again! No, but for real. Lightyear Theory states that Toby is taking heavy inspiration not just from Woody, but from Buzz. And the character who will take inspiration from Buzz Lightyear is Kris. First, Kris is basically a toy or object to the player, just as Darkeners are to the Lighteners. Kris has consistently had their humanity stripped away from them as we puppet them around. They're the cage. In Toy Story, Woody is the one to consistently question Buzz's humanity, telling him over and over that he's a toy. A secret boss inspired by Woody might tell the same thing to Kris. The second point is that, similar to Buzz Lightyear, Kris will lose their arm, probably because of us. After seeing a commercial confirming he's a toy, Buzz tries to rebel one last time, only to fall and lose his arm. Kris will similarly lose their arm, probably to evade our control. This again ties back to the line of them having human parts. It seems to be written in a way that implies that the parts can be separated from the whole. Finally, we'll meet the vessel in Chapter 5. This will be similar to Toy Story 2, where Buzz sees the other versions of himself. Kris will meet the vessel, and this will tie into the greater themes about their existence. Alright, 100 out of 10. No, but for real, I really like this theory, and I can't believe you made Lightyear Theory actually work. To be honest, I actually think a lot of these points are solid. The first point is objectively correct. A large aspect of the story is how we're puppeteering Kris around and basically using them as a toy. That's pretty well established. The losing of the arm is also heavily theorized based on all the game's provided symbolism. I think it's likely that Kris will, at least, lose a hand. The final point, that we'll encounter the vessel and it'll bring the whole Kris existence conflict into view, also makes a ton of sense, and it's probably something that'll happen at some point, if not Chapter 5. To be honest, I think this theory is going to get a 9 out of 10 for me. As how connected it is to Buzz Lightyear, that I'm not sure, okay? I'm not sure if there really is going to be a Woody-inspired boss battle, nor am I sure that Kris is losing their arm will be directly inspired by Buzz, but I do like the idea that it's just like a shot-for-shot remake. Kris is like, no, I'm not a plaything, and they get up, they climb up on the banister, and they spread out their arms, and they jump, and then they fall 40 feet and lose their arm. That would be good. I think that Toby should do that. If he was smart, he'd do that. If he doesn't do that, it's because he's stupid. You can quote me on that one. No, but I think this is a great theory, and I very much enjoyed it. Theory 10 was sent by Lex.ham, and it's a bit of a crack theory. One of Jockington's weird lines is, "We seem different, but me and Catti have a ton in common." A ton, huh? Like jocking ton? Well, Catti's name doesn't have a ton in it, does it? There's actually not very many characters that do. There's Meta-ton, and then there's our favorite salesman, Spamton. Wait a second, Spamton's elemental pairing is Puppet and Cat. And Catti is a known dabbler in the dark arts, including summoning a demon with Kris in the woods. And she's obsessed with Noelle, and when Noelle put a task, she says, there, it's not too different from Catti. Perhaps Catti created the virus that resulted in Noelle getting the Peepus and cat petters, thus making Spamton the bizarre child of Noelle and Catti. And perhaps this inferno of jealousy is Catti upset that Noelle is adventuring in the dark world with Kris instead of Catti. Okay, to be entirely honest, I'm not sure how believable this one is. It's a great theory, and it's very fun, which is sort of my favorite type of theory, but I can't say that I necessarily believe it. Spamton being Noelle's games creature given from Catti's virus that's like... Spamton is now tied to Catti's jealousy of Noelle not hanging out with her. I think that's a little bit of a stretch. But, it's fun. It is very fun, and I do very much enjoy it, but I don't think that it is going to happen. I do have to give it a 5 out of 10. But I will say that Jockington's strange lines, that's probably going to be something, right? Like, is it going to be something? He seems to be like a totally different character now. It's like... I can't believe I'm referencing this. Have you seen all those like memes about how bad the Stranger Things ending was and how all the characters seemed out of character? That's like Jockington post Chapter 2, where now he's like a weird, like crazy person who's just saying nonsense. Does anybody else feel that way? Okay, anyway. Okay, I need to take a quick pause here to explain something. All of these previous theories were originally sent in by Patreon subscribers. However, before you freak out thinking this is going to replace the regular theory reviews, this was a one-time thing. As of this month, I've decided to shut down the Patreon page. While things initially started out really great, I had some health problems in November that slowed things down and ended up causing a ton of promised content to pile up, which made me realize that I just didn't feel like I could deliver the quantity and quality that I felt patrons deserved, so I decided to shut it down. One of the aforementioned problems was that I had promised a Patreon-exclusive theory review, a review which I had people submit a Google form for. The problem? I somehow forgot to ask for their names on the Google form. So then as consolation, I ended up asking them to submit their theories to a different, unique email account, and I'd include them in this regular theory review video. So the first theories that we covered today, they were sent by Patreon subscribers. I hope you're not... It's still technically a normal theory review because they're not Patreon subscribers anymore. Nobody is. It's gone. But, I didn't want to totally leave them hanging. So there were a few theories, like 3 or 4 very small ones I didn't get to that were duplicates, like the same person sent multiple. I will include those in a future theory review, but I mean, they're like a grand total of maybe 10 minutes max combining all of them. And I'm not going to do them all at once. So, I will include those in a future theory review. It'll never be as long as this segment just was. Again, this is probably the last time I'll be saying this since now that it's shut down, but I really, really appreciate all of you guys from the Patreon being willing to support me. Now on to a couple more regular theories before we wrap this video up. Jacob Y sent a theory about something that Andrew Hussey said. You see, in the recent newsletter, there were tons of Chapter 5 teases, but Jacob... It's Hussey, right? It is Hussey. I don't think I've ever heard his name pronounced. I once mispronounced a name, and ever since then I've got PTSD from that. It's Andrew Hussey. It's not something different. Okay, I'm just making sure. Anyway, if it's not, you're not allowed to make fun of me because I'm openly questioning it. I read Homestuck. I was in the fan base I hate fan bases in general, but I was in there in the most general sense, like on Twitter. I've never watched a Homestuck video on YouTube. So I've never heard the word Hussey said out loud, I'm just realizing. If it's not pronounced that way, oops. Anyway, you see, in the recent newsletter, there were tons of Chapter 5 teases, but Jacob suggests that the most important tidbit was hidden in the story of the development of the Chapter 4 Noelle House segment. Toby explained that in discussions with Andrew Hussey, the creator of Homestuck, he suggested a crazy scenario involving a bust on the table that you have to press together. Basically, it would be a bust of a character in a pose similar to Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone, sticking his hands on his face and screaming. But Andrew said, except it doesn't literally have to be Macaulay. It could be a character that makes more sense in world. Let's just say it's Papyrus for now. Why Papyrus of all characters? Sure, it could just be that one of his favorite Undertale characters, it immediately came to mind, but surely Andrew Hussie is so deep in the Deltarune sauce, considering he literally was helping come up with mechanics for a sequence tied so closely to the overarching narrative, that he would surely know Papyrus really wouldn't make more sense in world, especially since so many other characters would make good enough sense in that role. Like one of the Holidays, Asgore's Undyne, and any of the public figures in town, right? So why would he mention Papyrus? Well, the only conclusion that this theory draws is that Papyrus's role in Hometown isn't as private as we, the player, would think it is. Think about the prophecy, for example. Up until Chapter 4, we had mostly assumed that the Deltarune prophecy was just this spooky secret dark world thing that Susie and allegedly Kris had never heard before. We then discover that the same prophecy is the entire religion of Hometown. In the same vein, Papyrus may actually be some figure that most of Hometown's residents are actually familiar with. Whether he be a minor or major role, who knows, maybe he's the town's freelance magician or something. Of course, anyone who would be filled in on Toby's plan for the story, like Andrew Hussie, would know this, so of course it makes sense for the Holidays to own a bust of Papyrus. Okay, I love this theory. I think it's really funny to imagine that Papyrus, who we've all assumed is just a shy, unknown shut-in, is secretly like a local celebrity. Maybe it goes even deeper. Maybe when he shows up, Susie will be like, "Oh my god, that's literally the angel that we saw in the prophecy! It's him!" But for real, I do think that this theory has some sauce. It's like partially funny because I do think it's very easy to suggest that Andrew just chose Papyrus because, he came to mind at the time. But also, he could have easily said another character like the mayor or Santa Claus, considering the Holiday Manor is filled with Santas. All that being said, I do think it's a little too speculative for me to really believe. I'm going to have to go with 6 out of 10. Although, I wonder what Papyrus would be if this was true. How do people know him? I like the idea that he's some sort of magician, because that would be pretty funny. If this was true, I would hope it would be something absolutely ridiculous, though. Like, oh, dude, you don't recognize famous town celebrity and rich entrepreneur with that loud sports car, Papyrus? Like, something really funny. Either way, I do think it's a great theory, but I don't necessarily believe it. I think it's probably just Andrew Hussie said the first name that came to his head. Also, when I imagine... I can imagine Papyrus doing that face. Doesn't he have a sprite like that where he puts his hands up to his face? Am I imagining that? No, I think I'm not. I think that's real. I think that he does that in the game once. So I can see maybe that sprite came to his mind, and that's why he said Papyrus instead of, anyone else. Theory 12 was sent by Jimmy, and it states that the Eggman only shows up when the prophecy is broken. The weird route is the original prophecy, therefore he doesn't show up. That's why Gaster doesn't give you the complete chapter without issue trophy if you meet the Eggman, because it breaks the prophecy past what was already expected. I think this is a pretty good idea, but I do have to go 6 out of 10, as I have a bit of a problem with it, specifically the fact that if Gaster considers the Eggman an issue because the prophecy gets broken, then why doesn't he consider the main route an issue if it's also breaking the prophecy? I definitely think you're onto something, but I'm inclined to think that maybe it's more so that Gaster considers the Eggman a problem specifically with his plans. I like where you're going with this, but unfortunately I can't really find myself believing it right now. I think that the Eggman not existing in the weird route, it could just be explained by coincidence because he just happens to not be in our path, or it could be, I don't know. Maybe it's not a purposeful thing, right? Maybe it's just, I don't know. But I do think that the without issue is probably because Gaster doesn't like the Eggman specifically, rather than, oh, the prophecy is even further broken, or it could be his plans are broken, but the prophecy itself, I don't know about that. So yeah, like I said, I am going to have to go with a 6 out of 10. Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm going to be honest with you, I had no idea that I was going on this long until I checked the time. I think it's probably a good spot to wrap this one up for now. I know I have a ton of backed up theories sent to spookydoodtheories@gmail.com. Send your theories there if you want me to look at them. And I understand that, a lot of this one, most of this one was Patreon people who I messed up with the stupid theory review, and now they got all their backed up theories sent. Now I'm putting those up. The good news is I've now done this video. The Patreon theories are up. If you were a Patreon guy, by the way, and for whatever reason you sent a theory or you sent it to the email, and it didn't appear here, if another one of yours showed up, then I'll get it to in the future. But if you were like, whoa, where was my theory? I gave you a secondary email that you could email with the information of who you are and what your theory was. If you forgot what that was, email spookydoodtheories@gmail.com and say, I was a Patreon person. Here's who I was on Patreon. Can I get my theory reviewed? And I'll say, okay, and then that'll be that. But either way, I think this is the end of the Patreon people and the Patreon theories, and so I don't think that it'll take up any more time in the future. I still, I want to apologize for not asking for all the Patreon people's names and all that situation. But now I do have a ton of theories still sent to me from, all of you regular viewers, and I promise to make more theory reviews to try and get to them all. I've been doing once a month theory reviews. I kind of want to boost that number up, maybe do 2, maybe 3, right? Maybe I could do mini theory reviews where I just get a couple out there. So, there, like I said, there won't be any more videos that are mostly Patreon theories. I just had to do this because I didn't want to leave them hanging after screwing it all up. So that's that. That's that. Don't click off yet because I do want to just talk about one quick thing. It was Christmas and New Year's, and I took a break for Christmas, and then I got very ill over New Year's, so I couldn't make a video. I wanted it to be, I'm recording this on Sunday the 4th, January 4th. I wanted this video to come out yesterday morning, but I was sick, so I couldn't. Boo-hoo. But a lot of stuff happened. Toby Fox had that ARG. How long did it take her to smile? What the heck is up with that, right? I mean, what am I supposed to say about that? I was thinking about doing like a little quick video of my thoughts, but I don't have any real thoughts. I mean, I do have any real thoughts, but nothing conclusive, nothing solid. It's all just, nonsense. I do regret, I think that it seems like he was handwriting some of the responses because they were very specific. And so I do kind of wish I had sent Friend inside me to see what he would have said in response, but I didn't. What the heck is up with that? Give me your theories about that in the comments, because I do want to see what you guys think. I haven't found a specific, one source. I've seen people say, oh, it's going to be, Noelle, how long after the weird row from Chapter 4 did it take Noelle to smile? And it's I think there's a chance that in Chapter 5 at the festival, there'll be a creepy scene where Noelle smiles, and that'll be oh, okay. How long did it, I think it could be, completely referenced in Chapter 5. There could be a scene in Chapter 5 where the question, how long did it take her to smile, or a scene where it takes her a specific amount of time to smile, that comes up, you know what I mean? All of the stuffs from the Spamton Sweepstakes and the Spamton Sweepstakes 2 was directly addressed in Chapters 3 and 4. That I was really worried about that was going to be a FNAF-esque mystery that never gets touched on or answered again. And then it wasn't. It all got brought up. All the stuff, the roots and the cats and the what was his name? Beepo, what is that? What was Bojangles? Come on, what was? Oh my God, it's Jongler, and all the rest of those. Those all got brought up, and so it was wow. The only thing that didn't is how long did it take her to smile. So I do think that there's a chance that it's not necessarily a solvable ARG. It's just a tease for Chapter 5. The go forward with that answer implies that perhaps we will have to do something with our answer again, right? Maybe there's going to be a thing. I've seen some people say that it seems like it can be solved because it's being asked multiple times. I don't know. Toby Fox has never really done a solvable ARG like that before, so I'm not so sure. But really, I'm interested. That's for sure. I'm interested in seeing what you guys think. My guess right now is that it's going to directly tie into a Chapter 5 moment or thing. So yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please submit your theories to spookydoodtheories@gmail.com, and I will do more theory reviews where I cover all your theories. Thank you so much for subscribing. I hope you guys like this video. Tell me your thoughts on Asriel Knight. That was a crazy one. And I will see you next time.